All right, Xander, why don't we bring my first guest in here, if we might? That would be, of course, Sal Paolantonio, the host of the NFL Matchup Show on ESPN, my good buddy and a stalwart participant here in This Week in Pro Football for 19 years. How you doing, Sal?
Pat, good. How are you? Doing good. Happy week 9 in the National Football League. We're playing November football, Pat. Right. This is where the rubber meets the road, as we like to say.
Well, Sal, you were kind enough to send me some post-game stats from the Eagles-Texans game, and one really struck me, and that is that the Eagles are the first team in 50 years with a positive turnover differential in their first 8 games. Your thoughts on that?
Well, you know, that's the thing that they preach. Nick Sirianni and Jonathan Gannon, the defensive coordinator, they preach, we're going to win the double positives. We're going to win the turnover battle, and we're going to win the explosive plays. It's something they preach. It is something they practice. And, of course, it comes down to the quarterback, right? If your quarterback doesn't turn the ball over, it's like your number 4 hitter not striking out. Yeah. You're going to win a lot of football games. Now, he did have a fumble lost last night, but once again, he had a game without an interception, 21 of 27, and 2 touchdowns, sacked 4 times, no interceptions. So that's the key. Plus, I don't know what the Saints were doing. This has got to be the dumbest trade that ever. You know, they just apparently couldn't afford Gardner Johnson. But this guy has infused not only a takeaway ability that this team hasn't seen at the safety position since Brian Dawkins, and that's pretty high praise. But he also infuses a sense of real live energy into that defense. He and Slay and Bradbury's a little bit more reserved, but he and Slay are instilling a ball hawking, and they are tough. They're tough players.
They certainly are. And the defensive line, and even got stronger now with Quinn, but 3 sacks last night. But Sal, also the confidence, as you mentioned, in that secondary, you could just see how much confidence there is in the Eagles secondary, that they were just looking into the backfield, playing the game along with Davis Mills, and they weren't fazed at all by what he was doing. The other thing I want you to comment on is I had been challenging the Eagles for the first 7 weeks about the lack of chunk plays. But they certainly, against Pittsburgh, they fixed that in the first quarter and still demonstrated it last night, both throwing and running the ball. I don't see a real chink in the armor here, at least at this point. Do you?
Well, it's been 2 weeks since I've been on the show, so we got to talk about Pittsburgh and Houston. And if you remember, I texted you during the Pittsburgh game, and I said, okay, now we know, Pat, what this team was doing during the bye. They were working on their drop back passing game. You know, there were some RPOs, there were some triple options in that game, but for the most part, the chunk plays came out of straight drop back throws against the Steelers defense without TJ Watt, with their secondary hurting. But nevertheless, there was double coverage, and A.J. Brown came down with the football. So, I mean, the chunk plays are now, if you can get some chunk plays. And as Jalen Hurts said last night in Houston, you know, if you take away the pass, we can run it. If you take away the run, we can throw it.
Yeah.
So it's a very well-coached team. It really is. It's
really
very
is.
well-coached. You know, and the number 1 coach happens to be Jalen Hurts, in my view.
Yeah. Javon Hargrave, 3 sacks, as I mentioned. And the other thing that struck me, Sal, is take, for instance, the Eagles have a 3rd goal at the 5-yard line. With the score, what was it? I think the Eagles were up at that point 14-7. They run the ball. Whatever Hurts saw, or however the play got called, how many teams in the NFL these days run the ball on 3rd goal from the 5-yard line? I'll tell you the answer: 1. And yet it goes for a touchdown. And I just think it just shows tremendous field awareness by whoever made that goal and by Hurts for executing it. He really seems like to have made an amazing leap, Sal, from the playoff loss to Tampa 10 scant months ago to where he is today.
Well, you said it, Pat. So number 1, confidence. Number 2, competence. And 3, comfortable with his situation. He's been put into a situation where people around him are helping him be better day in and day out. And he already has that DNA because his dad is a coach and Nick Sirianni's dad is a coach. So they're pushing one another. and they've created this addictive philosophy of, hey, don't tell me about going 7-0. We're going 1-0.
Right.
And they took a roundhouse punch from Houston, and
Yeah.
the game was close.
Yeah.
Late in the third quarter, it was close. And yet they found a way to grind out a win on the road on Thursday night.
Yeah.
Even though the Houston Texans proved that they could run the ball, and that's what they do well, the one thing that they do well, and the Eagles were without Jordan Davis, but the rest of the team rallied, and they got to win. It's hard to win on the road, hard to win in the NFL, hard to win on the road, hard to win on the road on Thursday night.
Yeah.
I mean,
they did it all.
and when everybody is looking at you, got an X on your back.
Yeah.
I think this was the best win of the year.
Yeah.
Definitely.
All right. All right, listen, when we get back, Sal, I want to talk to you about the beast that is the NFC East. Get your comments on the other three teams there. I want to talk about the Eagles the Eagles receiving crew as opposed to the rest of the NFL, where you think they would rank. And then let's do a quick top five, too, at the halfway point of the 5 top teams in the NFL. We're going to do all that with Sal Paolantonio when we get back on This Week in Pro Football. Welcome back. This week in Pro Football, week number 9, the National Football League. Pat Callahan here, joined by my good friend and the analyst with the NFL, and I should say that analyst on Sundays. You're going to be this Sunday, Sal, right? Up in the Meadowlands, is that right?
Buffalo Bills at New York Jets with the incomparable Steve Levy on the call. I'll be right next to him in the booth doing the analysis job. I got to tell you, Pat, I could get used to that. It's a lot. It's a lot of fun.
Good
it's a
for
lot
you.
of fun.
Just remember now. Periodically, I'll just remind you: Ray Scott, Paul Crispin. Ray Scott, Paul Crispin. That's all you got to remember, right, Sal? but listen, I need to do a program announcement here, if I might, while Sal's on. We're going to move the show, which premieres Saturdays at 9 a.m., to Thursdays at 6. We're going to because we want to give it a couple more days for everybody to watch the show prior to the week's games. Thursday at 6. We will go live here on Jakib Sports. I'm very excited about that. All right, Sal.
Nice.
Let's rumble here. First, let me do this with you. The beast that is the NFC East. I mentioned in the open how the team does not have the division doesn't have a team with a losing record in it. Just give me a couple sentences on each of how the Cowboys how they're playing right now. Cowboys, Giants at the bye. And how about those Washington Commanders, winners of 3 straight?
Well, let's start with Washington. Taylor Heineke is playing with house money, right? Whether he wins or loses, it really doesn't affect his life.
Right.
They have no place else to go
Right.
with the quarterback position. So he's playing fast and loose, and mostly he's playing really well.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, on Monday Night Football, a week from Monday, at the link,
Right.
the Eagles are 10.5-point favorites.
Yeah.
Early line on DraftKings against the Commanders. That will be 3 weeks in a row that the Eagles are double-digit favorites. And the reason why the Eagles are double-digit favorites is, they take the ball away and they play mistake-free football for the most part on offense. So they're the class of the division. I think the Giants are the number 2 team in the division. They can run the ball, and their coaching in the fourth quarter has been magnificent. He makes great adjustments, Brian Daboll. And so does Kafka in his play calling. And, of course, we know Wink Martindale is blitzing at a clip of 41%. They're the only team, Pat, in the National Football League blitzing over 40%. Everybody is 37% or under.
Right.
And it's because of Wink Martindale, and that has created havoc for opposing quarterbacks. And then the Dallas Cowboys, they got lucky, in my view, with Cooper Rush. And the luck ran out, and Dak Prescott came in, and then they got, they're getting a little bit more healthy. Yeah. The Cowboys' defense is for real, for sure, but the Eagles don't play them till week 16.
Right.
And by that time, a lot can change.
Agreed. I do think Dallas, I would rank Dallas ahead of the Giants only because of the marked difference at quarterback. I'm still not sold on Daniel Jones. We'll see. But you can't argue with what you said about Daboll and the job that the Giants assistant coach.
Coaching is just better with the Giants than it is with Dallas.
And
with Dallas, it could fold in a second.
I know.
It go under in a second. It's a crapshoot. It really is.
That's true. But all right, so I wanted to talk to you about wide receivers. Philadelphia's receivers in their last game against Houston, 14 receptions for 181 yards and 2 touchdowns. I'm talking about the 3 receivers now, 2 and a tight end, or however a team stacks up. Just give me your thoughts on where you would rank the Eagles trio of A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, and Dallas Goedert versus, say, Miami, which has gotten a lot of publicity for its 3 guys, Cincinnati with Jamar Chase being healthy. Where do you rank that Eagles group?
Well, I would say the Eagles group is right behind Kansas City in the class of the Kansas City Chiefs, for sure, in terms of reliability and explosiveness. You have a Hall of Fame tight end in Kansas City in Travis Kelce. You have a burner in Miami in Tyreek Hill. That's an outlier. So you really can't compare him to anybody else. And then you have Stephon Diggs in Buffalo, who is, in my view, the best pure wide receiver in the National Football League. No disrespect to your guy, Cooper Kupp, out there in Los Angeles. This year I'm talking about.
Right.
So I would put them, you have the explosiveness of Devontae Smith, the incredible toughness, reliability of A.J. Brown.
Right.
And then Dallas Goedert leads all tight ends in yards after the catch. And what are those numbers that I have on Dallas Goedert? 8 of 9 targets, 8 of 9 against Houston for 100 yards and a touch.
Yeah.
Pat, he's now caught 40 of 50 balls thrown to him. An 80% target ratio is the number 1 in the NFL among all tight ends. Yeah. So I go Kelce, then I go Goddard. I'm sorry. I think he's the all-pro right now in the NFC.
Yeah. I don't argue that either. But I think as an overall group, if you take all of them together, I think the Eagles would rank. I have them right up there. Miami's first because Waddle, I think, is very underrated because Hill gets all the publicity. And then Buffalo, as you mentioned, Diggs is an outstanding receiver. Gabe Davis, if he stays healthy. But I got Philadelphia right behind that, Sal. I think that A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith are a terrific wide receiver combination. And as you
only reason why I would quibble with you is Gesicki doesn't match up to Goddard.
No, he does not.
And Dawson Knox does not match up to Goddard.
Agreed on both.
We're in the same ballpark.
Yeah, it's close. And again, it speaks to Sal to how this all happened seemingly overnight. Now, it was the acquisition of A.J. Brown has lifted the entire offense. Now that, and the fact now that they're doing these chunk plays, the Eagle offense really is now it's a
lot of things, right? It's his ability, Brown, I'm talking about. His compatibility is off the charts. Best friends with Jalen Hurts. Yeah. And he's an extremely coachable player.
Yeah.
I mean, there is no ego in this gentleman whatsoever.
Oh, there you go,
We're not talking about T.O. here. We're not talking about
ego.
DJ
he
got his money and he realizes now he wants to get his ring.
Yeah.
And I think he's one of the top 3 acquisitions all time for this football team. I do.
All right, Sal, let's do a little top 5. Sal Pal presented by the good folks at First Bank in New Jersey. This is our first one of the year, Sal. We're at the halfway point for a number of teams. Next week will be the rest of them as we get through the buys. But I'd be interesting to hear your top 5 and where you rank those top 2, which I believe is clearly Buffalo and Philadelphia. How do you see it at this point?
Well, there was a certain guy on ESPN. We won't say what his name was, but he wears pocket squares and gets his clothes at Ventresca in Doylestown. Okay. He had the Bills and the Eagles in the Super Bowl on ESPN.com when we made our picks in August. You can look it up.
All right.
So I'm sticking with those 2 teams as the top 2 teams in the league. And I think it's 1 and 1A. Yeah. It's very difficult. So I look at point differential, Pat, especially this year. Why? Only 13 teams in the league going into week 9 have a positive point differential, Pat. Yeah. That's the lowest number going into week 9 since the NFL went to 32 teams. Lowest number ever.
Yeah.
So that point differential is so important. There's a haves in the league and a have-nots.
Right.
So I Buffalo at 105 point differential, but the Eagles are undefeated. So I'm going to say Eagles are number 1. Buffalo is number 2. And that's a flip-flop. I had Buffalo number 1 last week. Yeah. But going on the road on Thursday night and taking care of business like that, that's a super quality win. So I give the Eagles the nod. Their point differential going into this week before Houston was plus 78, number 2 in the league. Kansas City's plus 51. Dallas is plus 50. San Francisco and Minnesota tied for plus 20. Pat, plus 29 is amazingly low, Pat.
Minnesota's not beaten. Most of their wins have come by one score or less, and yet there they are, Sal. They must be the most anonymous, nondescript 6-1 team in NFL history.
So what you had was volatility in the offseason. 193 free agents changed teams, most ever. And during the season, you had the most trade deadline trades ever in the NFL. So when you have volatility and upheaval, it tends to even, you know this in business, Pat, it tends to even everything out in terms of the competition, right?
Yeah.
So 55 games going into week 9 have been decided by 6 points or less. That's most ever in the league, ever.
Yeah.
Going into week 9.
Yeah. I would say, though, Sal, there is a clear-cut number 3 team, even above, say, like I have Minnesota 4, but the Chiefs are clearly, in my opinion, the number 3. Not that I think their defense it's a typical, if you will, Andy Reid defense. He doesn't, in my opinion, concentrate on it, but he is an offensive mastermind, and Mahomes appears to be playing with a chip on his shoulder to the extent that he doesn't want to hear about these young guns like Josh Allen. I think it's still a big hurdle for Buffalo to overcome. I know they beat them a couple of weeks ago, but there's a difference between October and January.
It depends where the game is played.
Right.
I mean, if it's in Buffalo in the AFC Championship game, got to wear the blue socks, Pat. Got to wear the blue socks.
That's right, Seth. That is right. You will be socking it up then. But I have the Chiefs 3. And then, as you were just talking about, the parity in the league and how many players and coaches have changed places, I'd have Minnesota 4, but it's not, to me, there's a big drop between Kansas City, Minnesota. And then as far as that 5th spot, Sal, I think there's a number of teams you could throw in there.
Yeah, you could. Listen, we are getting ahead of ourselves big time, but, not for nothing. I'm going to St. John's Church in Collingswood, saying my prayers, because I definitely want an NFC Championship game in Philly as opposed to going to Buffalo for an AFC Championship at age 66. I don't need that cold weather in January.
I can understand that. But
Please.
You're not going to get weather like we have in Philadelphia this weekend. That just does not happen up by Lake Erie. So you're right, Sal. So I'll be praying for you too, pal. All right, listen, Sal, we're going to let you go here. I appreciate you taking all this time. It's great to have you on again this week. Good luck with that game Sunday. I hope the Jets give the Bills a game, Sal, but you might have some filler to talk about in the 4th quarter of that game. The difference between those 2 quarterbacks is substantial.
Yes.
And you may have, bring some anecdotes with you about Jack Kemp or something to talk about in the 4th.
We'll have Steve Levy do some hockey stories.
Okay. Very good. Sal, thanks very much.
Thanks a lot, Pat.
All right, thank you, brother. The great Sal Paolantonio joining me here, as he always does here on This Week in Pro Football. And we look forward to talking to him again next week. When we get back, I think it's Cotillo. I think Tony Cotillo is going to join me. We're going to talk some fantasy football. And how about some performances last week? We'll get Tony's take on that when we come back on This Week in Pro Football.